mean, that's, I think everybody's grapple with being in business and being a business owner, right?
100%. I don't have a keyboard. Well, I do. I put it on the floor because I'm a old school like note card kind of person. So I probably won't interact in the chat, which
That's all right. I run chat,
maybe good or bad. Okay, perfect.
We'll be fine. I
don't want people to get ignored.
I've got an approach. So for those of you that might be on the line, we'll be getting started in just a couple moments. In the meantime, sit back, enjoy. If you do have any questions that you have for us, please feel free to jump into the chat session. We'd love to hear from you. We've got Q&A open as well. So if you want to answer those questions privately and not the public forum, please feel free to put them into the Q&A section as well. But again, we'll allow folks a few more moments to come into the room before we kick things off. Actually, we're still a little bit before the hour anyway. But we're excited to bring this one to you. There's a lot of questions around this FTC Safeguards Rule. It's a little vague well, I wouldn't say it's vague in who it covers. I think it's a little bit more expansive is what we've come to realize in who it covers. And we'll definitely go into greater detail on that today.
I think for the first time too, we're really seeing something that's a lot more prescriptive, right? Like I think that's pretty
prescriptive, but also a pretty easy assessment, right? And we'll get to some of those details today too. It's not as involved as, some of the DoD regulations, some of the other regulations out there. But I do anticipate that'll change as this safeguard grows, right? It's get the basics in and go from there. So, again, we'll be kicking this off in earnest in just a minute or two. For those of you that are looking at Derek's wonderful background there, just let you know, while that might be a green screen, he sees that every day. His offices are out in Hawaii. He's the man.
I do have those, I have those moments sometimes where I'm driving back from a client meeting and I'm staring straight at the ocean, at a stoplight, and I'm like, gosh, it's so gorgeous and beautiful. Do I have to go back to the office?
So again, folks, I will just give a couple. I'm seeing attendees starting to roll in. We'll just give everybody another moment and then we will kick this off. But we do thank you all for joining us today. And we're excited to share with you. And I tell you, Derek shared a lot with me in terms of what the FTC Safeguards Rule is all about, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more as we go through today. I learned something on every one of these calls, and certainly thank you all for attending as well. We'll give another 60 seconds just for those that are getting situated, get situated, and then we'll get this thing running.
Great. So it's back-to-back meetings that always get me. Like Friday, I've got 3 of them, and it's always like one's got to go a couple minutes over, but then you still need to go and get refresh on the drinks. And working virtual is a double-edged sword, certainly.
Yeah, and most of us are not smart enough to put a gap in between those meetings because we need to start them on half hours and hours, right?
Or we're smart enough to override the calendar when Outlook says, oh, let's make this a 50-minute meeting. And you're like, no, let's definitely make it 60.
Derek, people are giving you shout outs already. Bob Miller wants to say hello in case you're not checking out chat. Hey, but Bob. We're kind of creeping into 10:01. I've seen quite a few people coming. Anybody else that joins can pick up where, obviously we're kicking off. But, I'm going to kick this off first with introductions. For those that do not know me, I'm Brian Doyle. I am CEO and co-founder of BCIO Toolbox. BCIO Toolbox is an account management and advisory platform with 2 primary products in it: OnPoint account management and Cybrance GRC. So really tools for your BCIOs and BCSOs. Joining me today is a long-term partner of ours, one of my favorite people to chat with when I get to see him at shows and have a good time. And he's the CEO of the Ignite Solutions Group, Derek Gabriel. And for those that did come in a little bit later, he also is somebody we should all envy as he's living the beach life out in Hawaii doing his thing. But, Derek is a wealth of knowledge. And, as we were chatting about prior to the show, that we do weekly coachings over at BCIO Toolbox. We try to cover topics, but obviously we go very shallow into a lot of topics, hit some big details because we're trying to do this in a relatively short time each week to try to bring some information and foster that conversation. Derek came to me with some amazing insight on the FTC Safeguards Rule, areas that I think MSPs really should be looking at because this rule covers a lot more than we expected. So with that, I want to thank Derek for sharing that information with me. I'm glad we're able to get together today and share that out with you. And Derek, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself?
Yeah, aloha, friends. Brian, thank you I think you did a wonderful job introducing me, and I appreciate all the kind words. Yeah, so Ignite Solutions Group, we are a MSP slash moving into security service provider here in Honolulu. Uh, I did an interview with you guys a while back on your podcast, Brian. So folks that really want to know more about me and my whole story can listen to that. I don't need to rehash all that, but and one of the reasons, I thought about this last night too, and I was kind of like stressing out about doing a big webinar. Is why should people listen to me? Like, what do I have to say, right? Like, obviously, Brian, you said, personally, you believe that I've got some great knowledge to share, and one of the reasons why I think I want people to listen to me is that I'm your peer, right? Like, so this is going to be different than a lot of the podcasts or sessions you may have seen, because every event, insert X, right, has come out and said a bunch of things, and I've heard stuff from insurance providers, I've heard stuff from pretty much everybody, but like, I'm in the trenches with you and doing the same thing. So I think like that's the reason why I think what I have to say is going to be valuable.
And I think it's important to note that you've spent the better part of the last year really immersing yourself into this rule to make sure you know the ins and outs. And that's one of those things that a lot of us at the vendor level do not get to do to the same level as those that are then actually carrying the things forward for the client. So, I'm really excited for you to share with the MSP community and MSSP community what you've learned, because my guess is most of the people who are here are because they haven't reached under the covers to the level that you have and don't know some of the ins and outs, and certainly want to take advantage, though, of what the opportunity is. So let's kind of maybe shift gears now and kind of kick into what we're going to talk about today. First of all, for those of you that just aren't aware, the Safeguards Rule originally was set to go into service last year. It was extended, but now it's live. No more extensions there. So as of last Friday, it went live, and now is the time to really make sure that anybody that you have in your account base that isn't aware of it has knowledge of the rule being out there, something that they're going to have to adhere to. And certainly we're going to talk about ways that you as an MSP, you can potentially educate and of course capitalize on this opportunity as we go through it as well. But Derek, I know that you wanted to share a little bit about what it is that the FTC does first. So I'm going to pass the torch to you, and why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit wonky at times. Like, I like to dig into certain things, and a little secret nugget about me is I started out thinking I was going to go into journalism, right? I worked, I moonlit with the newspaper when I was in high school, and I liked writing, and ultimately I got into technology for other reasons. That's on that other podcast we talked about. But so one of the things that I like to do, and when I'm going to have a conversation with a customer, like I always want, like imposter syndrome sets in real easily, right, for us and pretty much anyone in the world. And so one of the things I sometimes do is, when I'm worried about my imposter syndrome start to talk to me in the back of the head, that's like, you don't know what you're saying, I go and I just kind of dive into it. I love to ask questions. I feel like that's a lot of my journalistic background, and then what comes out the other side is the distillation of a lot of that, right? And so when I started looking at this, I started talking with customers and prospects, and I realized I didn't quite really understand what the FTC was, right? It's Federal Trade Commission. We kind of all have heard about it, but it's one of those things we never really thought about. But what's really, I think, interesting, and I promise at the end, this is going to all come back into a beautiful package for everybody, but it's an independent government agency, right? Like, but they're running under congressional mandate, which was initially established way back in 1914, called the Federal Trade Commission Act, right? And so that broad congressional mandate really gives them the authority to levy fines and do all of these things. And what I think makes that a little bit unique is they can make rules, right? They can, which is where we're at today, right? We're going to kind of bring this in, but it's the other thing I think is unique about it as an organization is it's got this board of commissioners. There's 5 of them, and they're all appointed by the president and have to be confirmed by Congress. But in an effort to kind of like make this not political, right? Like, I mean, it's hard with everything hyper politicized these days, but the rule is only 3 of those 5 can be the same party. So the goal is to try to make it a little bit bipartisan. And then, of course, once those folks are confirmed, the president does pick who the commissioner is. And the reason why I think that's important, and the reason why I bring that up, is because I've heard from some folks that are like, oh, well, you know, the administration is going to change and then this is going to go away. And I don't think that's going to happen. You know, if you look at those sort of broad mandates, there's over 70, and I think we can kind of go into the next section here, Brian, is that like, what exactly do they do? And, you know, these are just some headlines from like the last week, right? Activision Blizzard. So we always hear FTC doing, you know, blocking anti-competitive stuff. So that's probably kind of the forefront in our mind. But one of the other big things that they do is they regulate, you know, unfair business practices, and they're trying to promote, you know, competition, right? And so there's a headline there about a celebrity endorsement of a real estate program, right? And it was like, no, this is really, you know, that's not actually training. You're just making some money. So FTC came in and slapped a big old fine on that. So that's kind of one of the things they do. But like, I think the key and the whole reason why we're talking is consumer protection, right? So if you wanted to boil down all of this FTC stuff, all of this safeguard rules, why are we here? Why is this such a big deal? It comes down to consumer protection, right? The whole goal of the FTC Safeguards program and the whole reason that it even exists has nothing to do with us as businesses. It has everything to do with the consumers that we work with, right? And as MSPs, a lot of us don't really deal with consumers, right? Like most of us are business to business. And as my lawyer always reminds me, like businesses operate in a completely different way. Businesses have way less protections than consumers do. And so, yeah, that's what I think is really kind of key. If you just look through this as a lens of this is all about consumer protection, that really kind of answers a lot of questions, I think.
And I think it's key to, you know, talk a little bit, Derek, when you look at some of the other regulations that are out there, binding business today, or really governing business when it comes from an information security standpoint, they tend to be pointed to different verticals in different industries, right? We've got the FFEIC that really goes after the financial industries, you know, banking and those kind of areas. We've got, you know, HIPAA that's governing healthcare. We've got, you know, others that are kind of really working to that. And the problem is business, and everybody has a cyber threat that they're potentially facing. And everybody has to protect personally identifiable information in some way, shape, or form. So one of the things the FTC, you know, is doing with this new safeguards rule is really kind of identifying some of the gaps that are out there. People that can run rogue, but are doing things with major impact to people, you know, individuals, those consumers at a personal level, potentially at a credit level too for them, right? So, you know, it's really important that we get some of these safeguards put into place. And, you know, and that's one of the things that I was interested about in this process, because it's like, I don't think I really saw the forest beyond the trees to see how many people were running rogue and not really being protected, you know, or having any mandated need to provide protection. That's probably the best way to say it there.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of regulated businesses, and I joke about this oftentimes with my barber when I go in and get my hot towel Japanese shave. It is that like he's got to comply with a bunch of city rules, right? Like there's health department rules, and there's all of these like things about where his sink is and how big the sink is and how the temperature of the water for them to be in business, right? And other businesses, you know, don't have any. MSPs are a perfect example. You know, our industry is completely unregulated, and you know, decide if that's good or bad. But different conversation. But all we got to do, right, is pick your state. You know, go to your Department of Commerce and register your business. It probably costs $30, and you're up and running in 24 hours. And so I think that's a challenge that, you know, a lot of consumers have, you know, with the proliferation of, you know, cybercrime and blah blah blah. And it's not even just cybercrime, right? Like ultimately it's just laziness and poor business practices, right? And that's really what this is addressed. All those consumers, like, I think there was just a headline, I didn't have time to look it up, so I'm gonna totally go out and guess, but I think it was like 3 billion, somewhere in there, like consumer fraud losses last year. The report just came out like a week or so ago, and that is directly attributable to this situation that we're trying to solve, right? Is all of these businesses are out there, they're just, you know, running a business. I bought a platform, I, you know, store my credit cards online, I sell on Shopify, I'm good to go. And people are getting their information stolen, and then the poor consumers are the ones that are on the hook.
Yeah, and I love what you touched upon there. You know, our industry is still one, and many industries are like this, where really all you need is that license or that ability to register your business and put a shingle up. You know, I always joke around, the lady that cuts my hair needs a license, but I didn't need to become an MSP. So, you know, while we can all determine where we feel work should be done there, what this is really saying, though, is some of those businesses that, you know, have been able to kind of hide in the shadows, if you will, while, you know, but in plain sight, now we're really looking at kind of trying to put some, you know, some teeth into what they're going to be doing. So, you know, with that said, let's maybe talk a little bit about what the rule is itself.
I like this. We can do a little bit of history on the FTC safeguards. So technically, the FTC Safeguards Rule has been around for a long time, right? Like, so you know, Brian, because you're super into compliance. You work with a lot of providers that are on the the incredibly deep side, and this goes back to and one of the I love it. The act was the act of Congress. Well, GLBH, Graham Leach Bliley Act was in 1999, right? But the FTC safeguards went into effect initially May 23rd, my birthday, May 23rd, 2003. Not born in 2003, kind of wish I was, but anyway. So it's been there, but initially it specifically only applied to financial institutions which the FTC had regulative authority over, right? And so the safeguards as a whole are not new to us as an industry, right? The safeguards are new because they've been updated. And now the FTC, the key the FTC did is they expanded the definition of a financial institution, right? So they didn't just go out and say like, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, we're going to put a bunch of businesses under our purview. What they did is they went out and they said, okay, consumers are calling us and saying, my credit card got stolen, my bank account got raped, I'm blah, 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 right? And so they look at all these different complaints that they get, and then they sort of sat down and said, okay, what is happening? These are prolific. How do we address them, right? And I think in their infinite wisdom, and this is really cool because I discovered this, and I don't think this is something that a lot of folks are aware of, but they went out, the FTC went out and they spoke to New York, I've got this on my notes because I don't want to get it wrong. The New York Department of Financial Services, and the New York Department of Financial Services has a bunch of cybersecurity regulations, right? New York did a bunch of new privacy stuff. And the second group that they talked to was the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, who also has the insurance data security model. And so when you put those together, and suddenly you're like, okay, this is not the FTC unilaterally deciding on a bunch of new things, right? They have literally talked to the insurance folks and said, what's the biggest driver of loss? And they've talked to the state of New York and said, what are the things that you think businesses need to do? And they put it out a year or so ago and, asked for comments. And we talked about earlier in the beginning, they said this was going to go to effect last year. Everyone, businesses said, oh my God, no, don't do it. Don't do it. The biggest pushback was, surprise, surprise, the automobile lobby, dealers associations. But they got a reprieve to June, and here we are today.
Yeah, it's, these things tend to get delayed a little bit, as when they put these drafts out to the public, get feedback, get the realities of being able to implement. But it's something that needs to be put into place, and certainly has been accelerated across all the industry regulatory verticals of late. Many of you are probably aware that this CSF 2.0 is being redrafted. They're looking at HIPAA right now too, which hasn't been updated in quite some time. So we're really seeing, CMMC, everybody knows the story PCI, on that one, right? For the most part, but we're starting to see this acceleration of trying to get into a regular routine on bringing safeguards up to match and meet where the cyber threats and the bad actors are coming at us now more so, and not leaning on some older legislation that really doesn't touch the technologies that we're utilizing today. So, kind of heading from there, let's kind of kick into who this impacts, right? So this is one of the areas that Derek came to me. He said, during our little half-hour coaching, I highlighted a few of the people that were impacted in that. He goes, yeah, those people are impacted, but there's more. And there's also smaller than what you had represented too, because there's, public knowledge about number of records and things like that, but it goes beyond that. And that's where Derek's really done a good job of kind of drilling in deeper. So we know most of these, right? I think everybody has heard about, Derek just talking about auto dealerships, the mortgage lenders and brokers, the payday lenders, the collection agencies, tax preparers, and your non-federally insured credit unions. And I think we got one there, your non-SEC registered investment advisors. These are companies that most of us are doing work with all the time, whether it's annually with a tax preparer, every couple of years dealing with an auto dealership, or that guy that might be doing, some hedge fund work, style work for us. These people are part of our lives. And until the Safeguards Rule came into play, they were not bound by any real regulation when it came to protecting all that personally identifiable information that I think you can quickly scan this list and see you need to give every time you want to do any business with them.
I smile when you talk about this list and, the idea that these businesses, have been around for a long time and do very little to this point when it comes to privacy and data protection, because I worked in the auto industry. I worked for car dealers. I worked for a Ford dealership and I worked for a Mercedes dealership, and I've seen both ends, regular and sort of what's supposed to be the luxury, and all the various folks in between. And they truly are some of the businesses that have been the most lackadaisical when it comes to implementing security of, there's stories, you can probably Google it right now and find a story from a week or two ago where someone drove off a car lot with a car, right? Like, I mean, it just happens.
I'm even going to get simple. I'm going to get simpler than that. So there was a period in my life where a friend of mine had a used car, operation, and he needed to raise some capital. So I took a little piece in it with the stipulation that I was going to come in and take a look at the operations. These guys did, what I would hear when it came to security is, I'm like, everybody doesn't have their own login. Nah, these guys, they have a tough time learning how to log into things. They're really not, So the point is, it's a very lackadaisical industry. And they were the ones, not surprisingly, to be kind of kicking and screaming going into this, as you mentioned earlier, and really pushing back the date, because for some of them, it's going to be a change that they might not be able to actually execute on.
And we've been talking to a lot of dealers, because I knew the industry myself. Like, we decided we would, there's a little low hanging fruit there, right? Like, and in honesty, it is a heavy lift, right? But it's not a heavy lift because the Safeguards Rule is onerous. It's a heavy lift because it's always a heavy lift when you come from zero. Right. And I've heard, that I think that's something I've heard you say before. And like, whenever, and this is just MSPs in general, right? And so many folks, that give advice on operational maturity and efficiency and those things. It's always right. Start with yourself, right? The MSP is patient zero. And like, even ourselves, right? Like, when you kind of go through and sort of do your first assessment, when I came into your program, Brian, and it's like, okay, don't use admin passwords as your everyday account. Ooh, okay, I'm gonna have to fix that. Like, it's a lot of stuff that it seems overwhelming because you're not doing it yet, and that's their situation that a lot of them are in. And we, even to this day, like, we just had a conversation earlier this week with a principal that owns 5 locations. And he's, he was pretty confident. Like, he's like, we've spent a lot of money and I feel like we've probably got this under control. But then we started talking, and like, some of the encryption stuff, they were like, we have to encrypt our hard drives. Oh, okay. And that's the, I'm getting a little ahead of ourselves, but like, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and the mandates are getting, tougher, not just drifting from the FTC for a moment. It's kind of like where NIST is headed and the CMMC is headed. It used to be with those regulations that you could identify where your gaps were, put together a plan of action. And if you followed your plan of action prescriptively to the letter, you could be awarded contracts while you ramp to that state. And one of the things that they're looking at CMMC too is, no, for those high impact contracts, you got to be at 100% from day one. There's going to be no leeway. So, there is room for growth in every one of these. Nobody, when you start from zero, yes, you're going to find gaps. The question is, how quickly can you execute on those gaps? And, from a from a, now if I go become the art card dealer or the payday lenders, this could be something you promote, right? We are FTC Safeguard. This is how we handle it, because people are much more aware than they were even 3, 4, 5 years ago on data handling and what these breaches can look like. Almost everybody's been a part of a breach. Anybody that's doing any dark web scan, see if you've been, your information's out there. So now
and that's a key. Sorry, I want to.
Oh yeah,
real quick,
please
Brian.
jump in.
That's a super key point. I was going to bring it up later, but you brought it up, so I want to like really underscore it, make sure people heard you. Consumers are becoming educated. Actually, education is one of the mandates of the FTC. I didn't put it on the slide because it's kind of boring, but this is one of the things we tell, like right here, right now, this slide, this section that we're getting into here of who is required to do this. There's no FTC police. No one's going to knock on the door tomorrow and say like, you must be compliant. But consumers are going to become educated. It's like, this is how, right? So far, this came out well over a year ago internally. Some folks in compliance were talking about it. Suddenly within the last 3 weeks, all the vendors are talking about it because now they're like, our product solves this problem. And then now you're going to have the news talk about it, right? So suddenly consumers are going to know, I got to start asking questions about what vendors are, what my folks are doing to protect my personal information, right? So not only now when someone goes to shop for something, are they going to be like, blah, 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 question, do you have it in blue? They're going to be like, oh, here's my application. Oh, how do you protect the information I put on this sheet, right? Like that's going to actually be a question that consumers are going to start to ask. It's not going to happen overnight.
But I think this likens back to like when we were younger, there was a point in time where the Better Business Bureau was really kind of with teeth and a threat, right? When we think back to, shopping with our parents, it was, hey, are they in the BBB? What's their rating? That kind of thing. Well, this has the opportunity to kind of become that in now this electronic world. The BBB is not as big of a deal when you've got this global economy that's coming from all kinds of, online shops and things like that. But now you look at kind of where this FTC Safeguards Rule sits, and you say, look, yeah, people are going to get more savvy with it, and they're going to ask, how, do you got the, for lack of a better term, the FTC Safeguards seal of approval? And if you don't, I might not do business with you. If you're coming to me with a paper form still at that auto dealer to do my loan when you've got a computer sitting in front of you, we probably have a problem, right? Because where's that paper going to go? In a file on that desk? that kind of thing. People will become more savvy, more aware. And I think we've already seen that as MSPs, even with our business customers. Any of us that have been in this, 10, 15 years, the customer is much more aware than they were 15 years ago. So, that's a great point you bring up. And it's going to be interesting to see that. And we'll talk a little bit more, I think, about the policing of things a little bit later, too, as we get here. But let's kind of segue back into so Bob's saying right now he'd be more comfortable with paper at this point. That there's schools of thought on that piece too, right?
Except that minimum wage guy that moves the cars out in the parking lot is going to walk by the desk and take a few home and go shopping with some social security numbers, right?
Yeah, I think that's both you and I with having a little insight to the inner operations of those places. That there's all kinds, right? But coming back over here to some of the customers, these were some that I really hadn't thought about that also are part of this. When you start looking at property management, those folks that have leases, I think of my daughter who's in college, who we just gave name, rank, and serial number to get her, her college housing for next year. Mortgage brokers,
they're always pulling credit scores these days, so that's a social lookup.
Yep, mortgage brokers is redundant to the last page, but good to put them there again.
Yeah,
real estate appraisers.
And what I think is and what I really love about this group is so this is where things start to get a little like, this is the gray area, right? And the way that I look at it, this is a big opportunity for us as the providers to reframe this, right? Because if you sit down with a real estate agency, they're going to think, oh, this doesn't apply to real estate. But then you're going to be like, do you do any property management? And they're like, oh yeah, we've got Lisa and Steve in the back that manages a portfolio of like 40 properties. And so suddenly that whole organization, because they all share the same network and connected devices is part of when we get into the details, But now that organization that ultimately thinks that they're not required to fulfill these obligations is suddenly on the hook.
And, another thing there too is, and when you look at a lot of these businesses, the question is, who are the ones starting them too, right? Now, every time we have a housing boom, mortgage brokers appear out of nowhere, right? It really becomes a big thing. I remember just before the fail back in 2008, we had a group that opened up a mortgage broker. Most of them had worked in gyms prior to that. That was really kind of their background. And the first day I went to show them, after we set up their network, we were going to give a little training. We didn't realize that they didn't know how to use Word. They had no idea what, a system was like. Again, I'm a little far-fetched here. I don't think we'll run into that today as much. But the point is, there's no qualification in some of these businesses to get into them, but they are handling
Right.
that money and they're not really sure.
I just networked at an event for a small chamber of commerce in a city here in Hawaii, and drinking my wine, hanging out, chat with some folks, and I talked to a gentleman, and him and two folks run a mortgage broker and brokerage. There's he works for the senior broker. There's licensing involved, but they, and I've seen this heavily in the last decade, and even more so now, right? The DeFi, right? The decentralized finance, blah blah. Like there are hundreds of platforms that you can go out and sign up with, and obviously do the requisite licensing, and suddenly you're a mortgage broker, right? All your system is you're like, I log into this website and I just feed data all day, and that you're essentially a glorified salesperson, right? And what they don't understand is those are folks now that need to actually implement this, right?
Yeah. So they have a big education coming to them in two fronts before they can do that. And, we won't go through the rest of this, but I think you can see there exactly what's going on. But what impressed me is what I will call the hidden gems, right? You brought up three great stories to me, Derek, that I think we should highlight here. I think we want to start probably with the retail over to the right first, right?
Yeah.
Folks that you don't know that you probably have in your MSP roster of clients. So this is, one of those areas that you should, look at your roster of clients and go, do I have this? Because if I do, I better start talking it with them tomorrow. So take it over, Derek.
Right. And so retailers, right? Like, so this is one of those gray area ones where you're like, what's going on here? So I think the easiest way to sort of demystify, does an organization fall into this umbrella? And it's rightfully going to be a little ambiguous for a while. That's just the rulemaking process, right? One thing I want to kind of point out, maybe I'm getting the cart a tiny bit ahead of the horse here, is that sort of rulemaking is vague until the lawsuits start to fly, and then we're going to see the courts decide, where the hard lines are. But obviously it's cheaper to just do this stuff because it's all, as we get through the rest of this, we're going to find out, like, this is just hygiene, right? But retailers, so if you facilitate a credit card, right? So layaway programs are specifically excluded. That was one of the nice things they did, because they're like, layaway is not really credit, and people usually don't have to give out a social security number. But like, think of a record of data, right? Anytime you've got a person's basically their name, contact number, address, and social security number, bank account or not, that, like, if it looks like it's personal financial information, it falls into this. And so retailers facilitate credit, right? A lot of them have, Target card, Macy's card. Every time I've gone in, it's been a while since I've been in a Target store, but every time you go through, they're like, hey, you want to get our card? It's like, I can literally do it for you right here. You can type your social security number into the credit card terminal,
and you can pay for those packages right now.
Right. And so even small retailers, like, you think, oh, well, I don't work with Targets, but maybe you work with, a regional that's got 5, 6, 10 stores. They use a third-party platform, and they're issuing store credit cards, even though it's another bank, even though it's another something. If they there at POS are even if it's, any way in their system capturing that and transmitting that information, now they've got to do these rules.
Yeah. And some other
technically they're doing PCI, right? And there's a big overlap there, but we'll get into that.
And then you were sharing some things about the dental industry, a little smiling tooth over there.
Yeah, I there was a great podcast the other day on Science Versus about brushing teeth and stuff, and like if it really reduces cavities, and like I was like, oh my god, like because I just got a filling the other day, and it only started as an adult. Like I up to like age 40, I'd never had any fillings, and I went in for my 6 months, and they did the scrapey stuff, and then they come in and be like, oh, you need a small filling, and I'm like, in my mind, I was like, can I just do that another day? And they're like, oh, you're here and it'll take 20 minutes. Just go up front, figure out how you want to pay for it. And I'm like, do I, can I get a second opinion? Like, I hate when they stick you with the knee. Like the worst part of it's not it's the Novocaine, anyway. So I'm in my mind, I'm like, I'm prepared. I'm going home. I'm going to do this when I can clear a whole afternoon, because I don't want to deal with things. And I sit down in the chair and they're like, oh, it's going to be, you got the insurance discount. And they give me a calculator, and they're like, and they slide the calculator across. It's like you're financing a car, right? They slide the calculator across the table, and it was like $140. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm like, and it'll be done today. Like, she's, oh yeah, we'll put you right back in 20 minutes. You're done. And I'm like, all right, fine. And I paid with my credit card, because my copay, but there's a little sign right there that I'm reading. And I'm like, dental financing, right? If I said, I have a hard time, I can't really afford to pay for this right now, they certainly would have pushed an application for that across the table, right? So now dentists are someone that's got to do this as well.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think, you'll probably have a similar story about
100%.
your optometrist, right? I'm a guy that you wouldn't know it because I got contacts, but I'm legally blind. And, I've got the Coke bottles, and there's been many times where I've shown up there and they're like, oh, we got to do, I joke around about it, but I call it spot welding. Every once in a while, they got to zap a spot of my retina to make sure it doesn't tear, because that's what happens with nearsightedness. So, it's the same thing. I've gone in for the spot welding, and they've looked at me and said, do you want to pay for this now, or do you want to finance it? And, fortunately, I'm able to pay for it right now, but I'm sure there's a lot of other folks that aren't. And,
Yep.
I still wonder with that laser stuff if they ever actually did anything, because there's no way to prove it. But hey, neither here nor there. But I encountered the same thing there, in my journeys.
And there's one more, and this list goes on and on, right? Like,
yeah. I think we were talking a sense of that.
Yeah, you guys get it now at this point, right? If you facilitate financing in any form, even if you're just loading up a web screen on your computer, because you're interacting with that system. But recently we did one that was a company that sells and services golf carts, right? We're in Hawaii, lots of golf. And so again, but here's, and this is even another one I want to point out, because this isn't something that I think a lot of people know about. And this is just a little wonky trivia I just love so much. Early young in my career, I worked for a company that did POS systems. And so, and point of sale is huge, obviously, in grocery stores, right? And when it was back in that part of the world, I don't want to date myself. It was that time in the world, in our history, where they were finally getting like barcode scanners and scales that were connected to the system. And one of the pre-setup questions we would ask when we went in and evaluated their old, cash register with the buttons and the PLUs, the product lookup codes, is we get the whole PLU list. And then we would say, hey, can we have your list of house accounts? And then they would give us this. And for a long time, I was very young, and I didn't understand. I'm like, what is a house account? It's financing, folks. It's financing. So if a grocery store offers house account, and a lot of small ones do, house accounts to their consumers, and as part of that process, they're collecting financial, if they're getting social security numbers, again, if it looks and it smells like financial information, they're going to have to do this.
Perfect. So now let's get into some of kind of the specifics, right? And some of the things some of the other myths we're going to debunk today, because this was when I was really under the impression in my research really was there that you had to have 5,000 records to be accountable by the FTC. And you came at me and said, no. So
you're doing this in such a nice way, Brian. I sent you like a scathing email. I was like, Brian, what? You need to know this stuff. No, I want to touch on Bob's little thing about bar tabs. And I know it's conjecture, but I love it. And the truth is, right, like if we were giving out social security numbers to get a bar tab and they were running our credit to check it, then yes, that would actually account. But obviously they don't do that. So yeah. And goes right into this thing about 500 records, right? So in the beginning, and like this, everyone, like this is my personal, all right, soapbox, here I go. This is my personal thing. every time someone asks me or has a conversation about a way to exclude them or their business from doing something, I'm like, it's easier to have a conversation about just implementing and doing. It's going to be just as effective, it's like, and you're going to save yourself time and money. So that's like my personal thing on this. But a lot of folks did that early on, as they were like, boom, 5,000, I don't count, right? And then there's the gray areas of the customer's a record. It's really clear if you read the actual a law is that it's records. And so I've talked with a few folks, right? And it's like, it's really easy to get to 5,000 when you don't think you've got it, right? I've talked to like, tax folks, and it's like, hey, how many people do you do tax returns for every year? And they're like, oh, maybe 300. And it's like, okay, well, is that 300 individuals? Oh, so, it's, maybe 30% are individuals and like the rest are families, right? And it's like, oh, okay, so families are two, right? So now you got to double that. And then it's like, well, how many people do you have that come in and sit down but don't sort of complete it? Oh, we X number. So okay, is that data still in your system so you can follow up with them and try to market to them next year? Like, yeah, it is. Okay, so now and how many years back does your database go, right? Oh, 10 years. Okay. So now, boom, they've said, someone who thinks they only had 300 records suddenly has 5,000. So I think that's sort of one of the big keys, is like sort of that kind of understanding about that. But the truth is, ultimately now, it's an exclusion of like 4 of the most, what I think they consider to be the onerous items. And we'll get into the details, I think, here shortly. But yeah, that's there's no exclusions.
Right. So, and I think you just hit you kind of put it in the way that my parents used to say: if you spend as much time just doing the work that you do to try to figure out how to do your homework, you'd probably already have it done by now, right? And it's kind of that same kind of concept right here. So let's close out on a couple of quick things here, so we can really get into, how can an MSP kind of engage their customer, right? So really, I think this is what you're alluding to here.
Yep.
While there's some exceptions, they're in there. There are requirements within the FTC. If you really look deep into the regulation, which thankfully you did for us, Derek, you would find out that you've got to hold these people to a different regard. But now let's get into really how can an MSP capitalize? And let's really try to refrain from, now we're going to just throw their security stack at them. But really, how are we going to engage with our customer and build a program to help them get there if they can't bite it off in one day, and make sure they're making the right decisions long term? So let's first kind of look at what needs to be done, right? Some of the things that need to be done: you got to designate a qualified individual to oversee the information security program. If you read about any cybersecurity program and any of the regulations out there, the first thing they basically say is, who's your internal security officer? And generally, if you talk to people at best practice, they don't want that to be the CEO. It needs to be kind of a division of labor as well. Second thing is developing a written risk assessment. How many of us have actually sat down and done a risk assessment in our business and looked at the threats that are facing us, both technologically, but even geo and economic, and really have an idea of what's going on for our business in that regard and where those risks live? So that's something that needs to be done. Limit and monitor who can access sensitive information. I alluded to that story of the car dealership that wanted to have the same password for everybody. The concept of least privilege is definitely getting better understood by our customers today, but there's plenty of times that least privilege gets circumvented in the spirit of getting things done, or simplicity, right? So this is definitely an area that our MSP community can help our customers understand, because that costs nothing, right? That's just going in and every once in a while checking out Active Directory. Encrypt all your sensitive information. Derek, you were covering that with those people that were blown away about having to get your hard drives done, but that only makes sense, right? We've been talking about that as an MSP community probably since the mid-aughts, right? Realistically. But it's still out there. Training security personnel. Now, this is kind of a gray area in my mind, and Derek, give me your thoughts on this as well. But it's really training people to be security aware. I'm not talking about security awareness training here, but the individuals that are internally running these programs for your company have to have some level of training in understanding what the regulation entails, understanding what tools and techniques can be done to execute on that. And then ultimately you can start looking at all the things that an MSP can help provide to then allow you to execute, like security awareness training, like improving infrastructure. But this training security personnel, I think, is one of the items that I see most customers wrestle with the most, because they're common business people. They're not coming with an IT background, and they're just not seeing it. What do you experience there, Derek?
Right. What's security personnel? You know,
Well,
like
there's that concept too, right?
right. And I should have gone in and edited this slide when we originally talked, and I forgot. But training's actually a bullet point as a headline on the rules, and it has a fork. Security awareness training, obviously, right? So training people, but it does clearly talk about that you need to train your designated security personnel, right? And that is why I think the MSP is so important in this equation, right? And that's where you alluded to in the beginning of this is not a go out, buy a security product, turn it on, and be done, right? This is a continuous process that is going to go on in perpetuity. And as MSPs, we're plugged in like tons of training, right? Weekly cyber call, programs like Brian does a training every Tuesday. Threat intelligence from ISAOs and ISOCs, right? The CompTIA.
Yeah, those are beautiful.
That's the kind of information that as the MSSP, we should be ingesting internally. And if we are acting on behalf of one of our customers as their designated security personnel, then that's an easy check, right? But if we're not, if this is a co-managed opportunity and you're talking to, they do decide to designate, maybe they got a compliance person from the banking portion of the compliance that they already do, or the dealer compliances that they have to do. And they say, well, we're going to have our compliance guy or lady be our security personnel. Then that's where you can come in and say, all right, we're going to provide you, a feed of threat intelligence of some kind, right? And there's some vendors that offer this already out for MSPs, right? Like you can sort of get some customer facing content on a regular reoccurring basis to give to your customers.
Well, what I think you really touched upon there is it's a great opportunity. As you know, MSPs are always looking at how they can drive value back to their customers. That's what started the inception of the QBR, but security is really bringing you an opportunity to train people on things that they will very quickly realize you're not selling to them. You're helping them understand, grow, and that, I hate the cliche trusted advisor, but really this is a huge opportunity for us to make bring the awareness that a lot of our customers do not have to these things, and help them understand that some simple steps can really help them push the needle quite a bit. Another one that I'm sure many struggle with too is developing that incident response plan. And this has been a hot topic in our industry for quite a while of late. I was just out at IT Nation Secure last week, and there had to be, 3 or 4 different sessions that were breakouts on incident response specifically and doing that. So, that's definitely an area that as an MSP, you can help both by putting in the right services to support it, but maybe even go in the next stretch with some of those customers that might be more targeted than others in really running those tabletop exercises, making sure you're ready to execute as well.
And my argument is, again, I think this is one of the one that everyone is always scared of. Like you say incident response plan, and people are just like, oh my God, incident response plan. And it doesn't have to be complicated. An incident response plan can be a single sheet of paper, right? It's just that, again, if you're lifting from zero, it seems like it's onerous. And my argument is you should have this for every one of your customers already. This is like an MSP maturity thing.
Yep. And then you got to look at your downstream service providers too. Those that might be interacting, whether it's, like an MSP in support of your network, so thus they can see some of the personally identifiable data, or, in other service providers that might interact with some of your data in the same way. You just needed to assess them. Another hot topic, when we were down at IT Nation, it was all around compliance, incident response, and vendor risk were primary messages throughout there, as well as SASE and a couple others. But it was less about the tactical and more about the policy and process side of things. And it was interesting to kind of see that emerging that way. Obviously for folks like me, that's exciting, but, realistically, it really is. If you don't know the process, it doesn't matter what tools you got.
And there's in this particular program's light, there's no BAA, there's none of that weirdness. All the key is, and this is again hygiene thing, right? If you're patient zero, you've done this already, all of these things and more for your MSP, and you can communicate and verify that to your customer. But essentially the customer needs to be like, all right, if I got an organization, if my plumber comes in here and they have access to the room and that file cabinet is not locked, and all of the applications are in that file cabinet, the plumber better be performing some of these rules too, right? And it's not that the plumber needs, like, no one's coming to like attack or assess the plumber, right? It's just, that's part of the security controls the organization's got to put in place physically, right? And so, but all of this falls, like, it rolls up, not down, right? So like, if you got a bunch of vendors that don't care and are like, you know, mopping up credit applications in the corner at night, the owner of this dealer or other, whatever the organization is, the owner is the person. It's so easy to pick on car dealers. The owner is the one ultimately that's the fines coming for the business and the owner.
And, you know, Bob Miller was putting into the chat that, you know, one of the things they do annually is provide their SOC 2 to their customers, so, you know, they can understand how they're approaching it. I saved multi-factor for last because it's probably the easiest, fastest, and most impactful thing you can do for your customer who might be facing FTC safeguards if they haven't done that, right? So, you know, I wanted to kind of put that as the closer. We probably don't have to go into a lot of great detail on that because it's pretty self-evident. But if you've got customers that are still struggling with getting to MFA, this might be the lever you can use to kind of help get them over the goal line with that.
And yeah, right, Bob, complete MFA, yeah. And I've, my little notes, I don't know if you can see them. I only got 3 that have red marks, and those are the ones that are excluded. And so that back there on the risk assessment, a risk assessment is still required. It just doesn't have to be written. Apparently writing things is more onerous, right?
Yeah.
Testing and monitoring, continuous monitoring is excluded, but they still have to have sort of those controls in place. And then less than 5,000 is excluded from an incident response plan. I think that's insane, because an incident response plan isn't complicated, and like, I feel like that's the cornerstone of security. And then there's one other piece that wasn't on that list, and that's the annual review and report to the board. They've excluded organizations with less than 5,000, but you know, that's a small org. They usually don't have a board, right? The owner's the guy.
And, you know, kind of close out where the MSP opportunity is. These are really some of the services you can implement that there might be gaps in your customers that really can bring it. You know, it starts right, you know, if I work bottom up, it starts exactly like Derek said, get an incident response plan in, because it doesn't have to be super in depth. It really just needs to be, how are we going to communicate and how are we going to track and how are we going to eradicate and contain what we need to do, and could be a single piece of paper. EDR, MDR, and XDR is really almost a no-brainer, right? You know, it's time for anybody that's got legacy antivirus to get into those technologies so you've got a little bit more insight. Vulnerability scanning, risk assessments, we've talked about those regularly, and those are tools that you can bring out in your advisory role and really help your customers understand what's going on. Infrastructure and service upgrades for the equipment that will no longer really satisfy these regulations. As we know, there are folks, auto dealers again, we can pick on, that hang on to technology until it basically bleeds. So, you know, that's something that we can, you know, you can look at. And then emerging services are really compliance as a service, where you're kind of continually tracking this so it doesn't become an onerous of that effort each year or over time. And we're seeing at VCIO Toolbox, a lot of our customers are starting to build vCISO as a service programs. And if you guys don't think those are lucrative, I've yet to have anybody tell me that they're not getting between $3,000 and $5,000 for those services. So, you know, really start thinking about your advisory side of things too, and how you can take these tools, wrap them in, bring some information to your customers, like hopefully we did for you today, and really.
And Brian, I got a question.
Yeah.
How would someone manage some of this information?
You're lobbing that softball way too high, buddy. You know, that's a little too easy. So with that, I'll say we are going to segue over. Don't take this as a pitch for VCIO Toolbox. You can do this 100 of different ways. But in VCIO Toolbox, obviously within our GRC section of life, we wanted to make sure that we are working with customers to, you know, to start looking at helping them prepare for the FTC, safeguards as well. So I'm just going to inactivate an active in a customer right now and kind of take you through the process. So if I were to bring my customer up in VCIO Toolbox, I would choose my GRC program. So, you know, obviously we've got FTC safeguards in there. You can see we have a number of other regulations you can manage, and you can choose multiple different programs for your customer if they're bound by different laws. So this really gives you the ability to kind of keep track of everything in one single spot. Now, conducting the assessment is really easy. These are the 7 or 16 safeguards that really this rule covers. This is the simplest regulatory compliance assessment that you can manage and that you can assess for your customers. And a lot of it is common sense at this stage. And as I mentioned earlier, I do expect that this will expand. This is to get people into it, and then they'll put a little bit more, I won't say teeth, but probably that is the right word for it, into the regulation. But it really, is making sure that you're getting those things that we just talked about done. And we can almost hit all 16 because it'll only take a minute, but you see that the classifications, qualified individual, conducting that risk assessment. Do we have security controls designed and implemented and reviewed? If you say, what is that? One of the easiest things I'd say is marry this with a CIS controls implementation group number 1. It's geared for the types of businesses that we manage in the MSP space, mostly under 250 people, don't have IT staff, don't have security staff. They're not targeted by hackers generally, but the bots are going to find the gaps and they're going to exploit those gaps if they find them, right? So that's really the customers that by and large we tend to serve. I mean, we all have top end and bottom end. But really, if you're saying, well, what controls can I implement? I don't know what I can do. Marry this up with that because there's only 56 safeguards over in that rule as well.
Yeah, and that's what I'm happy you said it. I'm sad because I wanted to be the one to say it.
that is thunder, baby. That's what I
that
do
is
here.
my ultimate. That is my ultimate. Like that is my advice. And I think at this point, like, and in the safeguards, they call them safeguards. They are controls, right? And controls are physical, administrative, and technical. But yeah, like I think every organization, every service provider, and I think we should start calling ourselves like MXPs, right? X for everything, because it's like SSP, ITSP, blah, blah, anyway. So I say service providers, like that encompasses, but we all should have a standard of some kind, right? And for my organization, we took our standard as CIS Group 1. So we do that with all of our customers, right? That are fully managed. And if you are doing something like that, then they're going to almost automatically qualify for the FTC safeguards and other things that are coming, right? That's the kind of thing that we touched on briefly that I really like. I'm drinking green tea. I'm reading my tea leaves. This was based on a New York state law. It's based on a bunch of rules from the insurance providers. FTC has a mandate to provide guidance and reporting back to Congress. What do you think is going to happen in, a few years? Like, everyone's going to have some kind of national cybersecurity standard, and it's probably going to look a lot like the safeguards.
And we just got a question in Q&A, but I think I'm going to hold that for the close just because I think it is the question that I think is on many people's minds as well. So just letting you know, we will get to that for you in just a moment. To close out here, and in the spirit of time, as I'm looking at the clock, we're not going to go through each one of these, but what I'm doing very quickly in parallels, I'm just kind of assigning some risk in a couple areas because I want to see how you can report out. But you can see the topics that are designated. We've really talked about most of these right here. There are some specific controls that the FTC is calling out. Those are the ones they're going to be looking for. Again, they are all covered under implementation group number 1 in the CIS. But you'll see that, these are here. And most of your MSP tools that you're already using within your security stack can provide the answers that need to be put in here if that technology is implemented. When it comes to program monitoring, this is really where you start getting out of scope probably for what a lot of you are doing with your customers. This is where those vendor risk assessments need to come in, those third-party views. There has to be a measurement to the effectiveness. I spoke earlier about the NIST 171, but where if you put something in your plan of action, the DoD is expecting you to do it and do it as you prescribe that you're going to do it on the timeline you said you're going to do it. And then when you do it, you're supposed to go in there and report that it's been completed and improve your score so they can, so they can be aware of it. And this is kind of a similar concept here where you've got to have somebody that's kind of keeping score of where you were in the process and are you falling behind or not with your plan of action? Because if you do have a problem down the road and litigation comes at you, if you said you're going to do X and you didn't get there and you were egregiously behind, nobody's going to slap your wrist for 30 days. But certainly if you're 180 days behind on your plan of action, you're probably going to have less of a legal leg to stand on. And really there, it's not about as Derek said, the FTC police coming. It's now a consumer lobbies a claim against you and it gets investigated. And that's when you're going to have to make sure you got your ducks in a row. We talked about the incident response, and then it's having that qualified individual and having a qualified person report on this in writing annually. And that's where VCIO Toolbox can help somebody if you just want to keep organized. Because as you see here, I put a couple different things into the plan of action just to kind of give a guideline here. We're able to see who did it. I can even assign the resource that owns it, so we know if it's an internal user that owns it or one of your service providers or external parties as well. And we're able to generate reports. So if somebody says that we want to see this in written review, you know, I can come in here, grab my plan of action report. I can scorecard myself, show them where we stand against each one of those compliance regulations and what our next step's going to be, and then ultimately show them my plan of action, who owns what, and where we stand in this progress. So, you know, this is just a very easy way for you to, you know, manage the process. You could do this in a spreadsheet. I say that all the time. What does, you know, our tool bring to you? It's repeatable. You can close periods, so you can really track that score and upgrades, and you can share it out with your client. There's the ability to collaborate, to collect evidence from them, so you're not maintaining documents elsewhere. So it wasn't meant to be a sales pitch. I hope more what we're showing is that it's not a very amazing or a very difficult framework to manage to. And if you've just gotten a process and approach, you should be able to keep active with your customer in that. Certainly, if you want to aid yourself in it and want some automation, happy to have a chat with you at some point. But, you know, again, the purpose today is really to educate you to what's coming and what you're going to need to help your customers with. And I hope we did a good job of that. Now, Derek, before we wrap up here, I do want to throw out the question that came in through our Q&A. And the question was, I heard something about a whistleblower program. Do you know anything, and can you share what you know? And I'm going to be candid. I don't know about a whistleblower program yet for FTC myself. So I don't know if you know anything about that.
Well, there won't be one specific to FTC, right? Or excuse me, to the safeguards, but there is, like, what all of FTC's overarching operational processes still apply, right? So yes, you know, let's say you got someone works for Lithia, right? One of these giant, you know, huge multi-state car dealers, and, you know, they're seeing something they're just not comfortable with, and they got to go say something. That's, you can expect that that's like something on that scale would probably fall under, you know, oh, let's go investigate that one. That looks good. I don't, you know, there's a, you know, there's a whole conversation about insider risk because, you know, you get a disgruntled employee lobbing complaints over to the FTC. You know, FTC is a little bit like the IRS, and it's gonna be 100% like HIPAA, right? There's no HIPAA police. When you have a breach, and you know, there's gonna be a wall of shame. Probably, I mean, I don't know that they will necessarily have a wall of shame, but the press is the biggest wall of shame, right? But they're gonna come in after that breach has happened, and they're gonna be like, God, this was a number of consumers that were like heavily damaged. Who did that? Why? Right? Oh, it's you, such and such, you know, dental chain. All right, here's your fines, right? And then it's going to sprinkle out, right? They're going to sue you as a service provider. Were you the responsible party? Were you acting as the responsible party? Like, you know, and that's why I think this reporting is so important overall to MSPs, right? You shouldn't be suddenly doing, you know, QBRs and assessments just because you have a client that has FTC. This is like, you should be doing this for all of your customers. This should be part of like an overarching program, and you should be charging for it. And OSPS, by the way, Brian talked about this earlier, that advisory services like vCISO are extremely scalable, extremely duplicatable, extremely repeatable, and you don't need help desk people, right? Like, you're not responsible for tickets. If you are the MSP from the top to the bottom, yes, you're gonna, you know, you've got to do stuff. But oftentimes in these security advisory roles on compliance, you're giving them a list of things that they need to do, and their team or their providers got to go and do it, and you're just making sure it gets done, right? And those are high margin services.
So Derek, I just want to stop you there for a moment. We're at the top of the hour, so those that do need to jump off, I just wanted to make sure that you had Derek's contact information. If you have any questions, go to them. We're happy to stay on for a few more moments and answer anybody's questions that you might have. But, you know, I know some folks, I'm sure, got to get to the next call. We stack them up. Yeah. And I wanted to make sure that you got an opportunity to jot down Derek's information if you wanted to get some more information from him.
Sorry, thanks, folks. No, you're great. And if someone, I'm horrible at email, so like best is probably to ping me on LinkedIn. And the truth is, I'm horrible on all the things because I'm just, you know, right now I do a lot of sales. I'm heavily focused on sales, and you can't double dip. I gave the service desk away on my team. But if you do reach out to me because you got a question and I don't respond, it's not because I'm an asshole and I hate you. It's because I'm busy. Like, just keep bugging me and it'll come through.
Yeah, and guys, feel free to ping me too, because I can usually get Derek's attention. All I'd have to do is say only part of what I know, and boom, he'll come at me.
And there's some, for folks that are still here, there's some great community resources, right? Like I said, Brian, you do a thing usually every week. You've got your podcast with your cohort. West Spencer does a program called Empath Cyber.
Amazing.
I'm blanking on who's the gentleman that has the cyber call that is
Andrew Morgan cyber call.
Andrew Morgan, thank you. Yep. And then Andrew Morgan also has a small huge conference, great conference. As far as I'm concerned, best cybersecurity conference for MSPs. He also has a small community on the side of that, and I can't remember the name of it, but you can Google his name. You'll find
if you get to cyber call, you'll find all the rest.
Yep.
Yeah. So awesome. With that, really want to thank you, Derek, for sharing what you've come to research. 12 months of digging in on this, regurgitated an hour. So kudos.
Yeah, and I've got a fun sheet we put together that I've been using with my clients in lead gen. I'll give you a copy and you can send it to the list.
Yeah, we can include that with some follow up. If you want to watch this again, we will be posting this to the BCIO Toolbox YouTube channel. So if you go up to YouTube at BC and search at BCIO Toolbox. This will be up usually within about 24 hours of any of our presentations. We get that up there. If you have any questions for myself or Derek, we'd love to answer them for you. Just hit us up on email, LinkedIn. We are found in all those different channels. And with that, I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. And I hope you found a couple of ways that you might be able to engage your customer, elevate your value and go hopefully make some money.
Thanks.
Take care all.